Hunter, walk into this room, please, please.
I mean, you're just gonna explode the ground and then seal me in there.
No, I would never do that. Look, I'm really injured and hurt.
No, you are. You've done it the last 18 times, every single time when you get hit.
Oh, wow, that was so last 18 hunts. I'm a new Raging Brachy now. Oh, fuck it. Yes, I was gonna just lock you in here.
I know you were.
Do you wanna come in anyway?
Yeah, I do! Hello, my fellow hunters, and before we get into this, I do need to stress, need to emphasize, need to really put across that I, love Raging Brachydios more than life itself! But his Iceborne incarnation incites interesting inquiry, because he is undoubtedly, let's be honest here, an absurdly scripted fight, and I don't think that that's a buzzword for an inherently negative connotation, like a few people seem to think so, but I do think it is a very interesting design choice for a game like Monster Hunter. Because if there's one thing that I would say defines why the fights in Monster Hunter are so, well, compelling, so addictive, is that they are so free-flowing. A monster has a defined moveset, yes, and in certain cases parameters for when X move comes out, and you can sort of predict and work around it, but generally speaking, compared to more typical boss fights in other games, the monsters are much more, well, fluid, reactive. They take the initiative, and while you can learn them to an absolute T, there is always that element of anything can go wrong in a hunt, and it does. It's why farming the same thing hundreds of times is so very compelling still, because no matter how long you play this game for, there will be times that despite all your experience, all of your skills, or lack thereof in my case, you will be surprised in the best way about the turn of a tide in a glorious battle with the best of beasties.
You're gonna die.
And that's something really special. There isn't phases, there isn't this happens at this % health, there isn't do this when he reveals his weak spot. Of course you could argue that there are times where that is a kind of thing, like you've knocked the monster down, go wail on their weakest tenderized part for a few seconds. Yeah, okay, in a microcosm that replicates that, but you know what I mean when I say that Monster Hunter fights are much more fights than, well, sort of a sequence of instructions, learnable, typical boss battles. Whereas recently, we've started getting some fights that distinctly have elements of, well, that in a scripted, this happens at this time and you need to react in this way, element to it. And it's a rather fascinating little shift. But the question is it a bad shift? Is it something that's inherently not belonging in Monster Hunter, or does it add something? And, well, that's a very hard question to answer, and, well, this video is going to attempt to answer it. So, the first example I want to bring up of what I'm inherently talking about here is, well, I guess technically Behemoth's Meteor was very much the first, but it was a crossover monster, and you can kind of just write that off. So let's look at Safi'jiiva and his Sapphire of the Emperor, which essentially works the same as the Meteor. You're either in a safe place, or you guaranteed die. And that is a very cool moment, right? It's one of the best attacks in all Monster Hunter. It is gorgeous, it is impactful, and the first time you see it, well, why is he in the air? Oh!
What?
Oh!
What?
Run!
I can't
What is
see!
this? What is this? What is this happening? We're like in an infernal furnace full of what is happening? Help me!
Oh, the rocks! The rocks! The rocks! The rocks! The rocks!
And that is a moment, a memory, that will stay with you forever, because there's no two ways about it. That's fucking epic, it's badass, it's fun. But once you have fought Safi'jiiva enough, it essentially becomes, oh, he's gone up in the air, we go stand behind a rock and we sharpen our weapon and twiddle our thumbs. Can't wait to get back to fighting him. You get desensitized to the flair of it very quickly, and then it's just this really weird sort of, well, break in the fight where you don't have to do anything particularly challenging, but you have to do the same thing in response to the same move every single time, and it kinda just gets... Now, if it was me, I would love him to start doing the Sapphire of the Emperors faster and faster and faster as the fight gets on, so each time you feel a little bit more urgency, a little bit more intensity to get behind the rocks. That would be a really cool way to keep it at least a little bit more interesting. Although, to go even further back before Safi, I think the first full-on strict kind of, well, repeatable, expected, predictable, phase-based monster gameplay has to go to Ahtal. You get her to her health threshold and she goes to the mech, and not only that, you deal with the mech in the exact same way. Climb up, destroy through the webbing, get to her cocoon, bash it, repeat. It is very, well, repetitive, but the first few times it happens...
I want you to behold, my friend, one of the coolest things in all Monster Hunter.
Behold! Ahtal Nesto! Absolutely mind-blowing, and you can't get that level of whoa without something that, well, scripted. It is a powerful tool when used correctly, but I can't deny that I much prefer fighting Mantis mode than mech mode, and it's not really close. It just kinda gets stale quickly. But that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about here. A moment of a fight where the monster does something specific, you can't stop it, and your response has to be also something very specific and the same, and it leaves essentially no room for creativity. It's just do Y when X happens. And I think that the Raging Brachy fight has, well, a lot of that kind of mentality in miniature, because it's a very specified fight. He starts in the same zone. You do enough damage, he moves zone to zone until you get to the end. You walk in, he locks you in, you go through cycles of the floor being covered in slime, he roars, explodes, repeats that phase, and I don't like that I can call it a phase, but it is just a boss fight phase, over and over and over until either you die or he dies. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. Again, I absolutely adore Raging Brachydios. Brachydios has been my favourite monster ever since he first got introduced, and Raging has always been the better version of him, and now he's the best he's ever been. He is a spectacle, he is gorgeous, he is fun, he is challenging for the most part. He is one of the best times I've ever had in Monster Hunter. But I think he is also one of the fights that is getting, well, kind of, I'm used to this now, the quickest, and I don't like that. And it's one of the sparks behind this video. His fight plays out almost identically every single time you do it. There's no room for kind of weirdness or shifts to happen. There's nothing that can kind of change, really. Yes, what moves he does is, well, obviously up to him, but outside of that, you kind of know what's going to happen. It's very predictable, it's very routine, it's very scripted. Unless you go out of your way to capture him and fail the slay quest like some psychopath. And I'm sat here thinking, well, what would he have been like without that? Because without the scripted aspect, you couldn't do the final endgame lock-in, you die or he dies. And that is one of the single most amazing, incredible, badass, heart-pounding experiences I've ever had in Monster Hunter. That is just pure fucking awesome. He literally explodes the room, locks you in, and you have to do space management with slime before he just then cataclysms the entire room by yelling at it.
Explode!
And the first time that happens, oh my god! You are never going to let that slip from your treasure trove of dear experiences. But the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, it's like, oh, well, here we go again. And you don't really get that with monsters that are, well, left to their own devices. And the downside of doing it this way is that, well, he's only in his own optional quest. You can't just let him spawn in randomly, because there might be complications, there might be another monster in that zone, there might be all sorts that could go wrong that doesn't let him do that final attack. We can't have investigations for him, though then again, I don't know what's wrong with letting us have investigations for him, and it's just that scripted optional quest, but with boxes. Is that really so hard? Make immortal reactors a little bit easier? Well, I mean, if you're not me. And yes, I will take every opportunity that ever comes up to show that, because, you know, me and Brack Daddy have a special connection, and I need you all to be massively jealous of it. I think that would have been a fine thing to do, but it means that they're kind of him and Furious, although I don't know why Furious is only an optional. He just acts as a normal monster. He could be anywhere. That's really a kind of questionable decision, but because of that with Raging, because of how scripted he is, he's just kind of restricted to this little corner of his own in an optional quest, and once you've got the equipment that you want from him, he's sort of forgotten about forever, and you have no reason to ever fight him unless he gets maybe an Arch-Tempered because he's tier 3 later down the line. It's sort of a mystery why he's been so pigeonholed into this experience, but that's the key word there. They have made him into an experience, and the advantage of him being so focused, so scripted, is that the actual first time you do him is going to be so much more memorable, so much more heart-pounding, so much more intense, so much of a better fight than if it was otherwise, because you can do so much more because you are controlling the fight so much more. Essentially, the more scripted a monster is, the more fantastic your first time hunting them is, because you don't really know what's scripted and what isn't. Things are just happening. But the more scripted a monster is, the faster they get old and the less interesting repeated hunts and farming become. So it's a real double-edged sword that you have to kind of manage, and it's very much, well, a hard balance. It's not inherently better one way or the other, and I think the way to go is have scripted moments like Sapphire of the Emperor, but, you know, again, maybe tune it up so it's not just the exact same thing every time, but not have an entire scripted fight. I also don't think there's anything wrong with letting Raging just be in the Guiding Lands, being on other maps, and just don't give him his final lock in here with me. That can just be a special thing for his actual own optional quest / assignment. And yes, that might make him too easy, but honestly, he is much harder in every zone but that. Once you get to there, it's just don't stand in the slime and then hit him. He becomes really weirdly a pushover at that point. At least that's what I've found. So I don't think it's the greatest loss to not have that. But would I exchange, I suppose is my question, the mechanic of him exploding the zone and locking you in for the benefit of getting him on multiple maps, investigations, Guiding Lands? And honestly, I can't answer that question. If you force me to, I would choose being able to experience that brand new mechanic, being able to experience Raging made into this worthy Elder Dragon level threat in just optionals, than if he was just kinda tuned up but allowed to free roam in investigations and Guiding Lands. I think I would choose how he is now because of the sheer awesome power that they've been able to let him display, which they otherwise couldn't if they added him as more of a normal monster. So basically, I realize I just rambled for a while, but the inherent question I want to ask you guys, that I want your opinion on, is scripting in Monster Hunter, is that a good or a bad thing? Because animals in real life tend to be a lot more sporadic or random, but then again, they do have their instinct, they have their prerogatives, they have what they try and do, they have what they try and hunt, forage, they have where they try and be at night, where they try and be during the day. Animals are creatures of habit and routine, so you could kind of argue that the scripted nature does sort of lend itself to the ecology attempts at realism that Monster Hunter almost nails so perfectly, but maybe that's a little bit of a stretch stretch, because, well, all sorts can happen in the big wild world out there, and no creature is going to have the exact same day as the one before, apart from all of us who are trapped in our houses. And I hope you guys are all very much being safe and washing the skin off your hands. Either way, what a segue! But no, honestly, I hope you guys are all doing alright. I really, really do. It's awful what's happening, and at least my videos might provide you some modicum of distraction. Though I realize they would need to start being good for that. Oh! Look, answer the question, how do you feel about scripted Monster Hunter encounters? Do you think it adds, takes away? Is it about 50-50? What's your opinion on the Raging Brachy fight? I personally adore it, but I do think at the cost of making him so initially impactful, he has lost a place in general endgame, and he has lost his repeatable oomph. And that's, for me, a worthy trade-off, but you might disagree. So let's have some discussion, see what happens, and I will see you soon. Like and enjoy this, subscribe for more. Goodbye.
Rage Gaming with the video float.
But that's all that's really relevant at the mo, but I'm still gonna leave this up so you patrons know that I love you even though the outro's no longer that kind of relevant. But the new one's being worked on and it's gonna be a truly badass song, and don't worry, I won't be doing any rapping on it. I'm gonna go now. This was shit.